You won't believe the stuff they're pulling out of swamps these days. In this video, I'll be uncovering ghoulish secrets from wartime and even catching up with Hitler's last known relative, World War II swamp mummy. On a cold February day in 1943, somewhere over the frosty skies of northern Russia, 7 fighter planes zipped through the air like angry mosquitoes with trust issues. Out of a Soviet airbase in Chupa, 2 P-40s and 5 Hurricanes took off on a mission to slap down the German Luftwaffe's latest attempt at domination. Among the brave souls fighting for Russia was a 22-year-old pilot, Boris Alexandrovich Lazarev. Think Tom Cruise in Top Gun if Tom Cruise was Russian, wore a fur-lined hat, and didn't know he was about to become a historical deep-freeze mystery. Boris was part of the 760th IPA, a Soviet fighter regiment. Boris ran into German pilot Oberfeldwebel Rudolf Müller of Jagdgeschwader 5, the Avenger squad of Nazi pilots. They were also known by their very villain-sounding nickname Expertenstaffel. Translated into English, they were called the Expert Squad. I guess war wasn't a time to be humble. So you had Boris in his Hurricane versus Müller and his flying buddies in 4 Bf-109Gs. Müller shot Boris down near a place called Polyarmy Krug. Boris's Hurricane crashed into a swamp and vanished from history, or so it seemed. 66 years later, in 1998, the Spice Girls were on tour, the internet was making weird dial-up noises, and military historian Yuri Rybin was rummaging through dusty Soviet archives. He stumbled upon details of the long-forgotten aerial brawl between Boris and Müller. Reading that Boris was never found, Yuri Rybin went out to Polyarmy Krug to look through the swamps for his body. Amazingly, he found it. Not just Boris's body, but the twisted metal and rusted parts of his plane. Inside the cockpit was Boris Lazarev himself, mummified like an Egyptian pharaoh who took a wrong turn at Stalingrad. Thanks to the swamp's low oxygen levels, the fuel, oil, and maybe a bit of Soviet magic, Boris's body was almost completely preserved. Seriously, the guy looked better than most of the fellows at your local morgue, though there were some missing pieces. His feet, for example, were likely torn off by the brutal impact. His face was also not pleasant to look at. He probably slammed into the control panel upon impact, ruining his face for eternity. His hands were amazingly still clutching his seat straps like he was trying to escape death and the plane. Even after almost 70 years in a swamp, Boris was ready for anything. He still had a pistol on him, ready to rise as a swamp zombie and fight for Russia in World War III. Historians believe he tried to open the canopy and bail out, but the plane dropped too fast. He likely died instantly from the crash. As for Müller, Boris was his last kill. Karma didn't wait long to strike back at the German pilot. Just 2 months after Boris was shot down, Müller's plane got shot down too. He was captured and tossed into a Soviet prison camp where he tried to escape and failed. He was executed on October 21, 1943, exactly 8 months after Boris's death. Today, Boris lies buried with full military honors in Chupa. His plane, or what's left of it, is on display at the Central Military History Museum at Poklanaya Hill in Moscow. No known relatives ever stepped forward, which makes this story even more poignant. The man flew into history, disappeared into a swamp, and reappeared as a time capsule of war, loss, and resilience. That's life for you. Fishing for bombs, Italian style. When life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. When life gives you drought, you start looking in dried-up rivers for giant bombs from World War II. During the sweltering Italian summer of 2022, when the heat was so intense that you could make a pizza on the sidewalk and the cacti were sweating, rivers ran dry. Italy's River Po ran especially dry. The country's longest river, usually majestic and moodily romantic, became a muddy shadow of its former self. During this hot streak from hell, fishermen near Borgo Virgilio were poking around the dried-up riverbanks. They found something that was definitely not a fish. They unearthed a 1,000-pound unexploded World War II bomb, chillin' like it had been on vacation since 1945. The drought had drained the river enough to reveal what you could call the most dangerous lost and found item in Italian history. Army official Colonel Marco Nazi confirmed the find and helped organize the evacuation of 3,000 people. Mayor Francesco Apori had the fun job of convincing locals to leave. At first, some of the inhabitants said they would not move. He said, which is the most Italian response ever. Like, hey, it's just a bomb. What's the worst that could happen? But eventually, with some persuasion, everyone agreed to pack up and go. Then, on a quiet Sunday morning with a bunch of angry locals bust away to their relatives' places, bomb disposal experts did their thing. They blew up the bomb in a controlled explosion. No drama, no surprises, just one less war souvenir lurking in the dirt. The next time you're complaining about the heat, just be glad you didn't find a century-old bomb in your backyard. And now for a quick break. But first, I wanted to give a shout out and big thank you to Greg and Frank Snoke Jr. for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like this. War photos reveal terrifying new dinosaur. I take you now to the scorching Egyptian desert in 1914. A fossil hunter named Richard Markgraf is out there sweating bullets in a sandpit, digging up dinosaur bones like he's on a prehistoric episode of Antiques Roadshow. He unearths the skeleton of a monster, huge, gnarly, and not your average house pet. Richard is so excited about his find that he ships it to Munich. Years later, when World War II gets underway, Munich is bombed to bits and the fossils are destroyed. End of story, right? Not even close. The bones may be toast, but the mystery is just getting started. In 2024, a group of paleontologists in Munich led by master student Maximilian Kellermann decided to dig for bones. But not in the dirt. They were digging in dusty old archives. Maximilian stumbled across some old black and white photos from the pre-World War II days. And not the artsy kind you see on Grandma's mantle. These were snapshots of the long-lost fossil. Skull, spine, hind legs. Richard had documented his discovery very well. Max noticed something unusual. The fossil was labeled as a Carcharodontosaurus, but didn't match other specimens of Carcharodontosaurus. Max couldn't believe his eyes. Richard's dino skeleton belonged to a whole new species. Introducing Tamaryraptor markgrafi. Its name is a mashup of two words. Tamari is ancient Egyptian for beloved land. Raptor is Latin for thief. Put them together and you've got the thief of beloved land. This dinosaur was a raptor, but not your average feathery bird dino. According to the team's analysis of the grainy photos, it was about 33 feet long, had a nasal horn that probably looked super cool, and chompers so symmetrical they'd make your orthodontist weep. It was a ferocious monster, but you might be wondering if scientists are even allowed to name a new species based on some doodles and old snapshots. Great question. Even if the researchers admitted that it's not typically how things go down in the dino naming business. Usually, the International Commission on Zoological Nomenclature, aka the Fossil Police, frowns on making big claims without real bones in hand. But the bones are gone. They were blown up during the war. It's a miracle Richard's original notes are even around today. It could be that no other bones from Tamaryraptor markgrafi are ever discovered. That's just how elusive extinct beasts are. In this one very rare case, the Fossil Police are allowing a new species to be declared even without physical evidence. Do you know any other stories about priceless artifacts destroyed by World War II bombs? If so, let me know in the comments. The poets who outsmarted the Nazis with books. Would you risk your life for a book? No, really. Forget overdue library fines. Imagine smuggling centuries-old manuscripts under your shirt while Nazis and Soviet forces lurked close by, waiting to kill you for it. That's exactly what a group of poets, scholars, and intellectuals did in the Vilna ghetto during World War II. Known as the Paper Brigade, these unsung heroes pulled off one of the most daring acts of cultural resistance in history. They saved Jewish heritage from total annihilation, and nearly no one remembers them, which is why their story must be told. In June 1941, a Nazi looting squad called Einsatzstab Rosenberg arrived in Vilna, now Vilnius, Lithuania. They had with them a shopping list, a big shopping list. They were to raid the city's renowned libraries and museums, particularly the Strashen Jewish Public Library and the YIVO Institute. Their twisted goal was to create something called the Institute for the Investigation of the Jewish Question. Essentially, this was a museum dedicated to studying Jewish culture, but it was being established by the Germans as they steadily wiped out the Jewish people. It would be like a fox writing a book of history on hens, a little biased. What the Germans really wanted to do was make up their own version of Jewish history using real Jewish artifacts and literature. They forced Vilna's Jewish scholars into a labor brigade to sort, catalogue, and pack rare Jewish texts for shipment to Germany. Among these slave laborers was Zelig Kalmanovich, the former co-director of YIVO, as well as poets Avram Sutzkever and Shmerky Kazerginsky. While the Nazis were busy dreaming up their dystopian post-Holocaust research center, these men were secretly plotting against them. Kalmanovich quickly realized that any books the Nazis didn't deem valuable would be burned. So he and his comrades devised a plan. If the Germans wanted to steal Jewish history, fine, but they weren't going to get all of it. They began sneaking books and manuscripts into the shipments bound for Germany, believing that one day when the Nazis lost the war, those materials could be recovered. Sutzkever, Kazerginsky, and others took it a step further. They smuggled books into the Jewish ghetto, hiding them in basements, attics, and even burying them underground. Each day they risked being shot if they were caught. When the Nazis liquidated the Vilna ghetto, most of the paper brigade members were sent to concentration camps where many sadly perished. Sutzkever and Kazerginsky, however, escaped into the forests and joined the partisans. They traded books for bullets to continue the fight against the Nazis. When the war ended, they returned to a Vilna that had lost 90% of its Jewish population. Imagine going home and only 1 out of every 10 people you knew was dead. Absolutely horrific. But incredibly, much of what they had buried in the ghetto survived. They founded a small Jewish museum, but soon faced a new enemy, the Soviet Union. Stalin's government wasn't interested in preserving Jewish history. In fact, as Soviet anti-Semitism escalated, they saw Jewish culture as a threat. Having already saved these books once, they had to do it again. The paper brigade arranged to smuggle them out of Soviet-occupied Vilna and into Poland and France. The books that had been hidden from the Nazis now had to be hidden from the Soviets. It was one enemy after the other. Avram Sutzkever eventually moved to Israel, becoming one of the world's most celebrated Yiddish poets before his death in 2010. Kazerginsky settled in Argentina, where he tragically died in a plane crash in 1954. They may be gone, but thanks to them and their fellow book smugglers, the rich history of Jewish Vilna didn't vanish in the flames of the Holocaust. I have literal goosebumps from telling that story. The secret arsenal buried under Tokyo. Being an elementary school kid in Tokyo is probably just as boring as it is in any city in the world. But for one group of students, school went from boring to terrifying. These kids had no idea they were sitting on a literal war zone. In Tokyo's Nisha Tokyo City, underneath Tanashi Elementary School, construction crews recently struck more than just concrete. They uncovered about 1,400 firearms, 1,200 swords, grenade bullets, and even cannonballs. Yeah, I'm shocked too. There were enough weapons under this school to equip a small army, or at least one very confused after-school club. There must have been some really peeved parents after this debacle. The stash itself was found around 6.5 feet deep, which means kids were unknowingly playing tag just a few feet above what could have passed as a samurai/military flea market. Authorities believe the stash belonged to the Japanese Imperial Army. It was likely dumped there in a hurry after World War II ended in 1945. What's the craziest thing you found in a schoolyard when you were a kid? After the news broke, Japan's self-defense forces and local police got involved. The dangerous artifacts like grenades and bullets were hauled off for proper handling. The swords and guns were disposed of by the city. They thought about keeping them and maybe putting them in a museum, but the items were too deteriorated. They were rusty, crusty, and not safe for display, except maybe in a haunted house. Believe it or not, this kind of thing happens in Japan more than you'd think. It's practically a national pastime: gardening, karaoke, and finding unexploded bombs. In 2017, a live bomb was found at the site of the Fukushima nuclear plant, which sounds like the plot of a disaster movie that really doesn't need a sequel. But this recent discovery is a little more unusual because it's rare to find this many Japanese army weapons dumped in one spot. I'm going to give you some figures that will help you understand why Japan has so many buried bombs and weapons. From January 1944 to August 1945, the US dropped 157,000 tons of bombs on Japanese cities. Including the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, these bombs caused 333,000 deaths. It's no wonder so many bombs are found in Japan. A letter from the past. It was a regular Saturday in Manitoba. Cold coffee, dusty shelves, and the eternal hope of finding something weird in a stranger's garage. That's when Amanda Keller, co-owner of Prairie Pickers Cafe, did what every antique lover dreams of. She bought a random pile of old papers for a single Canadian dollar and ended up unearthing a 102-year-old letter from World War I. For the price of a coffee, she bought a direct connection to one of the bloodiest and most defining battles in Canadian history. The handwritten letter is from 1917, meaning it was postmarked in the thick of the Great War. The letter was written by Earl Sorrell, a Canadian soldier from the 78th Battalion. In the letter, Earl details how he was blown up during the Battle of Vimy Ridge. You've got to be impressed because most people who are blown up don't get to talk about it later. The letter wasn't to his mom or his sweetheart. It was written to the sister of the man who saved his life. In the letter, Sorrell describes being hit by shrapnel, pulled into a shell hole by his Sergeant Gordon and being told to stay put. Gordon didn't make it out. Sorrell later learned he had been killed in action. One of the lines reads, "That was the last I saw of poor Gordon. He died a hero along with many others that day." History sure hits differently when it's not just a name in a textbook, but a real voice from the mud-soaked chaos of battle recorded in ink. The letter is just chilling. Now, for those who slept through their history class, Vimy Ridge was brutal. In April 1917, over 100,000 Canadian troops launched an attack to capture heavily fortified German positions. It was the first time all 4 Canadian divisions fought together. According to historian Tim Cook of the Canadian Military Museum, the 78th Battalion had one of the bloodiest tasks of all. They were charged with taking Hill 145, a patch of land that was hell on earth. It was a storm of steel, Cook said, because apparently historians are also poets. He added that letters like Sorrell's give us a rare, raw glimpse of what it was really like on the front lines. And with all World War I vets now gone, these letters are the last voices left. Keller posted parts of the letter on Facebook. She's had offers to buy it, tips from amateur historians, and probably 1 or 2 weird DMs from war reenactors. But she's not cashing in. "This one's just too special to sell," she said. She's hoping to track down a living relative of Earl Sorrell to return the letter to his family. If not, she's prepared to donate it to the Canadian War Museum. It looks like some people still do things for the right reason, not for likes or for cash. Good on you, Amanda. Excuse me, there's a bullet in your neck. What's the weirdest thing you've found inside your own body? Maybe a piece of Lego stuck in your foot? Pencil graphite jammed in your hand? A bug laying eggs in your ear? Okay, that last one's too nasty even for me. For one man living in Shandong, China, the weirdest thing he ever found in his own body was a bullet. Some people lose their keys, some forget their anniversary. Zhao He, 95 years old and tougher than a $2 steak, forgot he had a bullet in his neck for 77 years. And here you are complaining about a stiff shoulder from sleeping weird. Zhao, a veteran of World War II and the Korean War, fell off his balcony. That's not something you want to do at 95 years old, or at any years old. He was okay, but he did have a little discomfort in his neck. His son insisted on a hospital trip because, neck discomfort after a fall tends to raise a red flag in people not forged in fire and war. Doctors took an X-ray expecting to see a fracture. Instead, they spotted a foreign object in his neck. It was a bullet. When asked about it, Zhao casually shrugged. He said it was probably from 1944, when he got shot while carrying a wounded comrade across a river like in a real-life action movie. Zhao thinks the bullet entered through his nose, shattered some teeth, and parked itself in his neck. It healed and he forgot all about it, until the mishap with the balcony. Zhao's family had no idea their wrinkled old grandpa was secretly Rambo. After doctors stared at the X-ray in what I assume was either awe or confusion, or both, they noticed the bullet was very close to major blood vessels. Their medical recommendation was to leave it alone. After 77 years, it wasn't about to do any more damage. It's like the old adage says, if it ain't broke, don't dig into your neck with surgical tools to fix it. An antique horror show. Photo album of human skin. This next discovery is for all my cannibals out there, all my Hannibal Lecters and Jeffrey Dahmers. I'm obviously kidding, but at the same time, hold on to your lunch because things are about to get gross. You know how antique markets are usually about vintage postcards, dusty teacups, and maybe a haunted porcelain doll or two. Yeah, not this time. Some poor soul browsing a Polish bric-a-brac market thought they were picking up a quirky World War II photo album. Instead, they brought home something straight out of a horror movie. The photo album was bound in actual human skin. The buyer initially noticed something was off. When they got home with the album, they noticed the binding was kind of nasty. It smelled bad, looked like it had faded tattoos on it, and there looked to be soft, fuzzy human hair on it too. Realizing they weren't holding Great-Aunt Gertrude's scrapbook, they handed the album over to the Auschwitz Memorial Museum. You can't be interested in World War II memorabilia in Poland without recognizing when you've found something truly terrible. After expert analysis, the buyer's worst fear was confirmed. The binding was made from the skin of a Holocaust victim, most likely someone murdered at Buchenwald concentration camp, and it just keeps getting worse. The album was owned by a Bavarian family who ran a guest house during the war. Experts believe the album was a souvenir from someone working at Buchenwald. The head of collections at Auschwitz, Elżbieta Kasza, said the technology and materials used matched known cases of Nazi leathercraft. You must know that by leather they mean human skin. I think I might be sick, but I have to hold it together because things are still getting worse. The Nazis were utterly depraved. Meet the Koch, the wife of Buchenwald's commandant and full-time sadist. Her hobbies included beating prisoners with a riding crop, forcing them into sick games, and collecting tattooed skin from dead people. She reportedly picked out prisoners with interesting tattoos so their skin could be turned into lampshades, book covers, and wallets. Somewhere the devil is covering his mouth and muttering, "Whoa, that's a bit much." After the war, Koch was convicted of war crimes and sentenced to life in prison. She ended up hanged in 1967. Her husband, Karl Koch, was executed in 1945. And while Ilse Koch is the most notorious sicko who made human lampshades, she probably wasn't the only one. The Nazis were seriously messed up. Let's get back to the album. You might assume a photo album made from a Holocaust victim's skin would contain photos of Nazi horrors. You'd be wrong. The album is full of landscapes and scenic views. It's surprisingly charming. Then you remember the skin, and it's disgusting. Let's close the book on this one. Hitler's last living relative has died. It's a weird thing to say, but here goes. Hitler is dead. He died in 2022. Not Adolf Hitler, but rather the last of the Hitler name. It's my strange pleasure to introduce you to Romano Lucas Hitler. He was a real Hitler, the blood of the Führer in his veins and everything. For decades, Romano claimed to be the great-nephew of Adolf Hitler. He spent most of his life holed up in East Germany in the sleepy town of Görlitz, then caught COVID and died at the age of 72. As far as the records show, Romano was the last person on Earth carrying the Hitler surname. If everything goes right, no one will ever be named Hitler again. But was he telling the truth? Let's do some Ancestry.com style investigating. Romano claimed he was Hitler's great-nephew through Adolf's dad, Alois. He claimed that Alois had a younger brother, and that guy's grandson was Romano's dad. It's a history that can't be 100% confirmed, but does sound legit. Born in 1950 in Sorau, Poland, Romano was raised by foster parents, lived on state benefits, and claimed that having the last name Hitler ruined his life. I mean, yeah, of course. It would be worse than if your parents named you Thurman Merman or something. Romano never married. He had no kids. He said he couldn't even get a job because employers weren't lining up to hire someone named Hitler. At that point, come on dude, change your name to something else. Romano's neighbors barely knew him, saying he was a recluse. His apartment was filled with weird and creepy photographs and looked like something out of a Stephen King novel or an episode of Hoarders. Which makes more sense when you find out that in 2019, Romano was convicted of sexually assaulting a young girl. Yikes. Just because you're named Hitler doesn't mean you have to be a Hitler. According to court reports, he kissed a 13-year-old girl after pretending to be interested in buying a garage from her dad. Okay, that's grossing me out. Romano claimed the kiss was a German greeting, but the judge wasn't buying it. Romano Lucas Hitler was not a war criminal, a politician, or a public figure. He was a man with a name so infamous, so cursed, that it ensured a life of social exile. Let's all just be grateful Hitler's name is finally extinct. The Vampire Dugout. No, it's not Dracula's summer Airbnb. The Vampire Dugout is a very old war bunker that's seen enough blood, sweat, and tears for the rest of human existence. In 1918, trench warfare was truly hell on earth. It was constantly raining sideways. The battlefield smelled like a soup made of mud, gunpowder, and crushed dreams. Soldiers hadn't seen the sun in weeks, and all there was to eat was something called trench stew, which was mostly sawdust. Vampire Dugout was one such trench. Built by the 171 Tunnelling Company of the Royal Engineers, aka the Professional War Moles, the Vampire Dugout was part of a massive underground network. The network was carved into the blue clay of Flanders after the bloodbath known as the Battle of Passchendaele. Why build underground? Because as the war dragged on, both sides developed better artillery. Being above ground was a death sentence. In the last year of the war, trench shelters had to be dug deeper and often closer to the front lines. By 1918, the war had become an escape room, but without the fun. Troops needed shelter, and the solution was to move the party underground. And I'm not talking man caves with dartboards. These trenches were misery for the soldiers, who were half-starved, crazy, and traumatized. They had nearly 200 interconnected dugouts in the Ypres salient alone. Some could house 50 men, others could fit up to 2,000. That's not a dugout, that's a mall. These spaces had kitchens, workshops, chapels, and bedrooms. It was a whole underground civilization. At one point in 1918, more people lived beneath Ypres than in the town above it. The Vampire Dugout was one of the smaller ones, built to hold 50 soldiers and one bossy senior officer. It got its name from the nighttime supply soldiers who emerged only after sunset to avoid being turned into human shrapnel. It's either a poetic nod to stealthy heroism or someone had a flair for Halloween-themed military naming. Built using a mix of I-beams, railway scrap, and stubbornness, the Vampire took 4 months to dig. It was finished in April 1918, just in time for the Germans to say, "Thanks, we'll take that," during the Battle of the Lys. The Germans snatched it up, but their victory didn't last long. By September, the British were back in town. Vampire Dugout briefly housed the Worcestershire Regiment, and then the war was over. Hostilities ended in November of 1918, and all the deep dugouts were abandoned. Not only abandoned, but pillaged. Locals, being practical and cold, swiped the wooden steps for firewood. They took anything and everything that might be useful. Then they filled the rest with rubble and got back to farming like nothing weird just happened under their potato fields. This is true. The hundreds of dugouts and trenches were filled in after World War I and then converted back into farming fields. Today, you wouldn't even know a war had ravaged the Flemish landscape. The Vampire Dugout was lost until 2007. Peter Barton and Johan van der Waal, alongside TV archaeologist Tony Robinson, went on a quest to find this mythical mud palace. Armed with trench maps, geophysical surveys, and a healthy dose of optimism, they found the Vampire Dugout on the very last day of the dig. The entrance was excavated with the help of the Buckinghamshire Fire and Rescue Service. They used the dig as a training exercise, so that's pretty cool. It took 3 weeks of work to clear enough mud to get the entrance shaft accessible. Then they sent in a remotely operated vehicle to assess the stability of the dugout. You didn't think they'd just descend into a bunker that's been buried for almost 100 years. That would be dangerous. Once the dugout was made safe, experts climbed inside and found signs of British occupation. Once the archaeologists finished doing and dying, they realized the best way to preserve the dugout wasn't to open it up like a tourist attraction like some had been suggesting. It was to flood it again. I feel your confusion, so let me explain. Waterlogged timbers typically stay intact. Dry ones collapse. By filling the old dugout with water, scientists have preserved it so that archaeologists can come back and look at it in another 100 years, or maybe even in 1,000 years. Someone could be making a YouTube video about the rediscovery of the Vampire Dugout in the year 2540 for all we know. For now, the Vampire remains hidden beneath a farmer's field. It's not accessible to the public. It's not a theme park. It's just the world's creepiest, muddiest, most haunted, flooded trench. I should mention one more thing you'll find interesting. In 1998, a local farmer's wife fell into one of these dugouts while washing her windows. Imagine Windexing your glass and ending up in World War I by accident. That's not just historical immersion, that's time travel with no seatbelt. What's the most haunting wartime discovery you've ever heard about? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching. Remember to hit subscribe and come back for more awesome videos soon.